Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 51st episode of Crime Over Wine, the only podcast with head-scratching true crime stories that are just better over a bottle of wine. I'm your host, Liam Collins, and this week, my guest co-host is a local news reporter and a mom, but her greatest superpower of all is being a true crime lover, too, which is how we first bonded together, actually, when we first met not too long ago. My guest co-host this week is Grayson Gordon. Hello, Grayson. How are you doing?
Doing great, Liam. So happy to be here, and I feel like I need to take you around with me to kind of hype me up and introduce you to people. Yes. Goodness.
Yeah. Oh, I charge a modest fee for that.
Okay, that's
for
fine.
sure. So we can make that happen.
That is completely fine.
But Grayson's a loyal Crime Over Wine listener, and so obviously I had to bring her on. So I'm so excited to have you on this week. And we have quite a case to talk about, Grayson. So but before we get a little too ahead of ourselves, as much as I want to get there, we have wine to talk about.
Yes.
Right? So let's talk about some wine. So this week we are drinking Mary Taylor's Bordeaux Rouge. It is a signature blend of 50% Merlot and equal parts Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon. It possesses much of the dark fruited complexity that made Bordeaux famous in the first place. So, and we were just talking about how this is the first Bordeaux I'm doing on this podcast.
Yeah.
I don't know how, but it is. And so I'm really excited to do it.
Yes. And I promise I didn't already drink some of it. I was letting it aerate a little bit because I like mine a little bit. So I did take the cork off, but I haven't poured any yet.
Okay.
So here's the first pour.
Okay. Love that for you. You're much better than I am. I always, save the bottle open, for on the podcast, mostly because I love to hear the sound I'm talking about. I love that pop sound.
The best.
So I like to savor it. But I do if I'm drinking recreationally and not purely professionally, I always let it aerate. Just to be clear, so I don't always let it show, but I am an aerator because you can taste the difference.
Oh yeah, for sure.
There's no doubt.
For sure.
There it is.
Oh wow, that was a good one.
What a sound. It was a good one. All right, so let's pour this bad boy up and get this Bordeaux flowing. Cheers to you, Grayson.
Cheers.
Thanks so much for coming on. Oh, very berry.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Ooh.
So many flavors.
And I usually like the drier side, but it's not too dry. It's that perfect kind of in between. And I can taste the berry in it for sure.
Oh yeah, berries are strong for sure in this. It's bold for sure. Dry on the drier side, 100%, which you kind of would expect from a Bordeaux for the most part.
Right. This is one of my mom's favorite types that we usually get. So I've drank plenty of these growing up.
Yeah. No, I'm really interested in again, everyone knows I love those big, bold flavors, but I'm really interested in wines that have those big, bold, dry flavors, but also are really good about still implementing a lot of those fruit flavors in there too, because typically fruity, to me anyways, equals sweeter.
Right.
And so that doesn't usually work for me, but this is teetering on that line, I think very, very well.
Yes. And it's interesting because it is a drier one, but the berry makes it super easy and light to drink. So
I agree. Yeah. It's adding something to it instead of making it an either or situation.
Yes,
for sure.
That's really nice.
No, I really like this one. I think I am very interested to see how it's going to open up throughout this episode.
Yes.
When we circle back around, because everyone knows I like to circle back around and and get it a little bit toward the middle of this episode. And so I am going to be real. We're gonna have a lot to talk about, not only for the wine, right? For when we come back to this wine. This case, Grayson, we have so much to discuss.
Oh,
so
wow.
I hope, listen, no one can see Grayson right now. She's sitting outside for this podcast in December. And so
Dedication.
I'm just letting you know, I hope you got a whole lot of blankets because you're going to need them to get through everything that we're going to have to discuss for this episode. Because man, oh man, that's all I have to say.
Woo, excited.
Yeah. Well, this week, Grayson, I want to tell you a case that I can promise you will not be able to stop thinking about once all is said and done. It seems like a fairly straightforward case, but then there are some truly left field turns that we are going to take that has taken this whole investigation into a totally different direction. This week, I want to tell you the story of Mary Badaracco and the missing Chevy Cavalier. For this week's story, we are going to travel to Sherman, Connecticut. And you all know how connected I feel to cases near where I grew up or have lived in. And Sherman is a quiet town, only about 30 minutes from where I grew up in New York, right over the border, about 30 minutes north of Danbury, Connecticut. And Danbury is where Mary Badaracco grew up. She went to Danbury High School, but dropped out at the age of 16 to marry her first husband, with whom she had 2 daughters, Beth and Sherry. But she divorced him just a few years later simply because he just wasn't the one, right? Gotta respect that to a certain extent. Mary made a life for herself, though, and was doing just fine on her own. She was independent, strong, really didn't need any man, right? And she thought that for a while, until she met Dominic Badaracco at a bar that Dominic had owned. And the two hit it off right away and got married in 1970. By August 1994, so 15 years almost into their marriage, she was 38, loved painting and drawing, and was working as a bartender and a house cleaner. And life was pretty good for her for the most part. Her older daughter had just had a baby, and she loved her grandchild more than anything. Sherry had just gotten engaged too, and she was looking forward to that wedding, obviously. But, sometimes looking at someone's life from the outside in may be rosier and brighter than what it actually looks like on the inside. Dominic had a bit of a violent tendency. According to Mary's daughters, Dominic was straight up an abuser, and the two had a pretty stormy relationship as it's been described. Dominic would often hit Mary, and during the worst of it, Mary would take her 2 daughters and run away from him. But as the daughters told the News Times, Dominic would always find them and bring them right back.
Okay, wow, we've got a lot going on. At the age of 16, she's married, she has 2 kids, and then she gets divorced, and then by the age of 38, she's married again and been married for a long time and has now one of her daughters expecting. Like, that's all of this to lead up. That's a lot of life to live in 38 years. Right there.
Yeah, just about right. And like to be clear, so she met her first husband at 16. They didn't get married though until a little bit while later. So it wasn't that young, but it was still very very young. For that note. But but a lot, I threw a lot at you right at the front. So like if that, I'm really setting the tone for the rest of the story 100%. But so let's like recap here, right? Like we're talking about like a strong independent woman who is now finding herself in a really abusive, bad situation. And so things are rocky, right, inside the Badaracco house. And so there's, again, we're just scratching the surface here, though, Grayson. So definitely hold on tight to that glass. And, again, domestic violence can look different and can be hard to see and believe and get away from. So if you believe you or someone you know and love is in need of help, call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. We are, as always, going to put that number on our website and in our show notes, too. Well, not only, though, going back to Dominic here, not only was he a pretty violent person, but Mary had just recently found out that he wasn't entirely faithful to her either. Dominic was having an affair with another woman, and Mary was actually getting ready to divorce him over it.
Okay, wow. So not only is this man being danger to her and her children, but also now he's not even being faithful to her.
Yeah, which I feel like you see oftentimes in those types of situations, right? Because like that aggression just gets like pent up so much that you end up having an affair. That happens a lot of times with abusive situations for sure. I have no like statistics to back that up, but just anecdotally speaking.
Right. And so Mary's got a lot going on now, and she seems like a really awesome, strong woman when you're saying independent on there. So
well, and like good for her too, right? For frankly, like if the domestic violence wasn't enough to like make you want to leave him, like at the very least the affair was. And so she's like she's standing up for herself at this point, like finally she saw where the line was and he crossed it for sure. Well, in August of 1984, Mary's 2 daughters were well aware of the problems Mary and Dominic had been having, and they were speaking to their mother on a really regular basis. Sherry, got a call, though, from Dominic's daughter, who he had from a previous marriage, and who was also recently engaged, too. Well, Dominic's daughter tells Sherry that Dominic wanted to speak to the both of them about their weddings. And that's when all of a sudden, right, it hit Sherry that it was kind of odd that Mary wasn't the one who was calling Sherry about this, and that Dominic didn't want Mary to reach out to Sherry about this. And that Sherry actually hadn't heard from her mother in a while. In fact, when she thinks about it and compares notes with her sister Beth, she hadn't heard from their mother in more than a week. So the next day after work, Sherry drives over to her mother's house and is surprised that no one greets her when she arrives, because that was something Mary always did as soon as she pulls into the driveway. And when she goes to the door, no one is home, not even Dominic. That's especially odd too, right? Because her mother's car, her Chevy Cavalier, is still in that driveway. But what's even more odd is what Sherry begins to notice as she inspects the car more closely. She notices that the car's front driver's side window is totally smashed in.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm just thinking my mom is very much, whenever I would drive, I used to work a late shift and I would drive overnight to come see my parents about 2 hours away, and my mom was always in the driveway waiting for me. And so that would have been an immediate red flag, especially if I haven't heard from my mom, if that was her routine like it was for me and my mother. But then seeing that, I cannot imagine how she felt, the heart dropping whenever she sees that, and then the window smashed in.
Right. Well, and like not a normal thing by any stretch of the imagination, right? And like, but too, like if she's not home and her car's in the driveway, like where the heck is she? You know what I mean? Like, granted, she could be out with Dominic, sure, but like if she's supposed to be there, like everyone's supposed to be there, then where are they? You know?
Right.
And like definitely window smashed in is like red flag of the century, 100,000%, right? But like there also could be a logical explanation, hypothetically speaking, at the same time.
So do we know what happened to the window?
Well, Dominic actually comes home not long after Sherry arrives at her house, and the two start chatting about the elephant in the room, right? Like her mom not being around and the fact that her car window is smashed in. And Dominic says that Mary had left. He got home on August 20th and she was gone. The day before, they had apparently, gotten into some sort of argument. Mary had confronted Dominic about his affair that she just found out that he was having, and the two got into it when Mary told him she was going to leave, and Dominic even agreed to give her $100,000 in cash that they had saved up in the house together as an informal settlement to them parting ways, to them breaking up. And Dominic admits, actually, to smashing in the window out of anger during this whole exchange too.
Wow. Okay, so this is a whole situation of the interaction between them, but then also he's trying to kind of seem like he's trying to smooth over things with Mary and kind of just move past it all with the with that settlement
with the daughter.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Right. Yeah. No. So true. Right. And I have a couple questions about that too. But like the fact that he, like, first of all, like you're clearly unhinged, right? If you are smashing windows, right? Like, so let's talk about that. Like that is not a normal thing to do.
Right.
To be crystal clear. But also the fact that he like owns up to it, right? Is like a little, like, I can't tell if it would be more reassuring or more alarming, right? Because it's like if you're you're admitting to it as though it's like okay that you smashed in this window, like that's red flag of the century, right? But it also, the fact that you are owning up to it is kind of like, okay, well maybe there isn't anything weird here if you're just like okay with that,
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't really know how I would end up feeling about that.
Well, also I know sometimes I've seen with watching true crime that when somebody is guilty, they try to kind of insert themselves and be overly cooperate,
right.
They cooperate as much as they can. And so I wonder if that maybe was just trying to make him seem not guilty. I don't know. But maybe that.
Oh, no, I could totally see that, right? And that would make a logical amount of sense to me if it was just like, yeah, like there's no there. Like I got angry, I smashed the window, everything's fine, right? And and it almost kind of takes the attention a little bit away from the fact that Mary's not there.
Right.
Because if you're just okay with just breaking windows, But so then also I have so many questions about this about this settlement thing, right? And like also keep that in mind because it's going to come up much later on.
Okay.
But like who has $100,000 in cash just like hanging around?
Yes.
Like that is not money I keep in my sock drawer by any means. I mean, granted, it's before ATMs really became popular, but they were still around.
Right.
it's like the banks were there. I don't know. It's just bizarre to me. I'm like, why do you just have that tucked away and are just like, okay, we're just giving it up?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't feel that does not sit well with me
Yeah,
at
I
all.
don't like that at all, honestly.
No.
So,
No, 0%.
this interaction, what is Sherry thinking about all this?
Well, Sherry actually mostly believes it, Grayson, and she's kind of like overcome with emotion at this time, like as I'm sure you can imagine, just like really upset that her mother would just take off without saying a thing, even at the idea of it, and it just wasn't like her at all to leave without a word or telling her daughters where she was going or how long she'd be gone for. Well, Dominic asks Sherry to clear out all of her mother's belongings from the house, and she says she would, do it in a few days. Dominic also tells Sherry something kind of interesting, Grayson. He tells Sherry not to tell anyone about her mother leaving, not even her sister, and especially not police.
Okay, red flag. If anybody tells me not to tell my sister something,
right.
I mean, I have a sister, so I get that. But if anybody's like, yeah, no, don't tell this person that's super close and would be sus about it too, then that's no.
Well, but like, why not is my first question, right? It's like if my mom's not here, what am I supposed to tell my sister if she's like, hey, have you heard from mom? You know what I mean?
Right.
I don't know, why would you go out of your way? I just don't understand what the thinking was. And to his credit, I suppose, she ends up listening to it. She doesn't tell Beth right away. But it's just, I don't know, it's just a weird thing. I don't understand, why that would be the thing. But I also, and I never even considered this until literally just at this very second, because again, if they grew up with this man, at least after a certain number of years, or over a certain number of years, and they clearly know what he's capable of in terms of violence and that kind of thing, maybe this was, the only thing I can think of is that maybe this was a little bit more of a threatening conversation, right?
Yeah.
Because this happens a lot, right, in these type of situations where you have children who are grow up in abusive households, even when you're adults, right, the second that overpowering kind of mentality comes out, you kind of revert back into that child of okay, well, just don't hurt me, you know what I mean? That's the only thing I can think of.
But what about the belongings, clearing out all of her stuff? That threw me off too, because if she's just going on a trip and she's going to be back, why do we need to take all of her stuff?
Well, but remember that's true, and hold that thought, right, for a second there too. But but also too, the fact that they are the settlement part of the whole thing, and they're splitting up. So he's clearly just get her out of the house, we're done, that kind of thing. So think about it from that perspective. But you're not wrong about that. Why not just let her, she's an adult, let her come back and take her belongings as is,
right?
Herself, but again, we have even more questions, and you're gonna have even more questions in just a second, so let's get there, Grayson. But again, Sherry listens to Dominic at first, and she stays hush as it related to what seemed to be her mother just skipping town. She returns to the house a few days later to pick up her mother's belongings, but is totally weirded out to see that most of her belongings, her clothes, her shoes, her things, were gone. All that were left were some of her art supplies and a couple of empty perfume containers, and her car keys, though, and wedding ring were still left out on the kitchen counter. And after a couple of days, Sherry kind of comes to that this was not her mother's normal behavior at all, and that something was really wrong here, actually really wrong. So she eventually clues Beth into their mother being gone and not really being accounted for, and Beth agrees that there was something off about Dominic's story from the very beginning. So they decide to report their mother missing to police on August 31st. Police head out to the Badaracco's home to investigate, and they see Mary's car still in the driveway, and they see that the window was still broken. They ask Dominic about the whole thing, and he sticks to his story that Mary left about confronting him about his affair. He gave her the cash, and she took off, and he smashed the window in a fit of rage. And police say that there wasn't much evidence of foul play at the house, and certainly not related to the car, so they end up not taking their car at all into their custody.
Okay, so they report her missing on August 31st. So how much time had gone from the time where her daughter went over to the house to this? How long was that?
So that's totally not 100% clear.
Okay.
It was a couple of days. So the last time that they remember speaking to their mother was on the 19th. So only 12 days have passed since the last time that they last made direct contact with her. So there's that, but so it's not 100% clear when she goes to the house and like what date that takes place on, but it's only a day or two.
Okay, but the police do take the report.
Yes,
okay.
They do.
So they just say they didn't see foul play. Okay.
Correct. Okay. Yeah. So they show up to the house, and based on the story and based on what they see at the house, everything, they're just like, there's nothing really here for us to document necessarily. Again, I don't really fully buy the window doesn't seem like foul play because you have a missing person and damage to her property.
Right.
That seems like potential foul play to me, at least on the surface level. But again, this becomes way more frustrating a little bit later on. So we are I'm going to say this a lot, Grayson, but just hold that thought for this one for sure, because there are a lot of thoughts to be held. Well, this isn't even, though, the craziest part of what police end up finding, Grayson, as police are conducting their investigation or start to begin, cultivating what this situation and this timeline. They find out that Dominic had already filed for divorce.
Divorce that quickly?
Yeah, Dominic had filed for divorce on the grounds of abandonment on August 29th, 2 days before Mary was reported missing. And Grayson, again, that's not even the craziest part. This case gets crazier and crazier and crazier with every single layer, because not long after Mary is reported missing, police get wind that there is a new woman and her daughters who had moved into Dominic's house.
Just a random... Who is she? What?
Well, Dominic tells investigators that this woman is someone who he was just renting the house out to, and plus her daughters came along with her. But shortly after Dominic goes through divorce proceedings more than a year later, where Mary was not represented at those proceedings, Dominic actually ends up marrying this woman. And as part of those divorce proceedings, he is granted custody of the house.
Okay, so I've seen in true crime before where there's just like a random Craigslist, like must be a woman to come rent out my house. Like that just throws a wrench into this of how did he just get this random woman to come and start living with him that fast?
Well, listen, I mean, I think if you ask Dominic, he would clearly want you to think exactly what you're thinking. But in my mind, I'm thinking that this is probably the woman who he was cheating on Mary with, if I had to take a guess.
True.
So, yeah, I think the renting thing in my mind is total BS. There's no way that this woman was just a tenant, like a week after all this happened, basically. Like, there's no way. But, again, let's go back to that timeline, right? Because he filed for divorce on the 29th. And again, we're not totally clear on when exactly Sherry went to the house. But if I take a guess based on how things kind of unfolded, it was probably shortly before that, if not the same day. And so I kind of the way I see this whole thing happening is Sherry shows up at the house, okay, things are moving. Okay, well, I might as well file for divorce now to try to beat whatever is trying to chase after me, hypothetically speaking.
Wow. So I know there are different grounds for divorce. So in that state it's grounds for divorce if you do abandonment. I know there's one of the clauses. Okay. So that would be a good grounds for him to be able to make that filing.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, you leave, you just up and leave, that is absolutely 100% grounds for divorce for sure. And especially if they don't show up to the divorce proceedings, I mean, that's a strong argument on your side for sure.
Right.
And I feel pretty confident. I don't know for sure, but I feel pretty confident that's the same thing in every state. If I had to take a pretty strong guess, at least I would like to think so in 2023. But who knows?
Yes.
Well, at this point, Mary's daughters are worried sick about their mother, and they are fully convinced that Dominic had something to do with her disappearance. And there isn't a single sign of her anywhere, months to a year after they had last spoken to her.
So, I mean, this is a long time after, so surely they can now search through her car and look for evidence after all of this is unraveled now, right?
Well, actually, Grayson, that's going to be pretty difficult to do because they agree with you, right? Investigators are on your side at this point that they should search through Mary's car for evidence of some kind after all this time. But the problem is that car is gone. Crime Over Wine is sponsored by BetterHelp. As someone who's used therapy for years, I know that finding a therapist can sometimes be a stress on its own, juggling your full-time job, your family, your friends, your podcast, and trying to find the right therapist on top of that can almost feel impossible. That's where BetterHelp comes in. BetterHelp matches you with a therapist that works for you on your terms. It's online, it's remote, and by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to one of 33,000 licensed professional therapists in as little as a few days. And because finding a new therapist is a lot like finding a new bottle of wine, if you don't jive with your therapist, you can easily switch to a new one at no additional cost. You can get 10% off your first month of BetterHelp by going to betterhelp.com/crimeoverwine. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/crimeoverwine for 10% off your first month. Join over 4 million people who decided to get help and get happy with BetterHelp. All right, Grayson, how's your Bordeaux tasting?
Very good, and I just finished my glass, so I need to definitely top that off because that was a lot.
I told you it was one of those cases.
Let me fill her back up. I feel like if this gets any crazier, I'm gonna finish this nice bottle right here.
I wouldn't be surprised because there are a lot of twists that we have not even touched on yet. But you know the fruit flavors, though, interestingly enough, to me anyways, are kind of dying down.
Yes,
a bit.
I was just thinking that. I don't know. It seems. Like I said, it's really an easy one to drink, which is good, and it's also getting less dry for me as I continue to drink it.
I agree.
So that's really interesting.
Yeah, it's all kind of blending together a very good bit. Like it's all like all those flavors, like those, because like I felt like there was like things on like a continuum, and like you have like all like these flavors on like the complete opposite side of the continuum.
Yes.
That were all kind of like mashing together, whereas now they're all kind of blending it together, and like they're meeting in the middle almost a little bit more.
I love how
that was
it
a good
changes.
analogy for me. Yeah, no, I agree. It is because it's kind of like an art science, right? That like it is kind of it's cool how it kind of evolves throughout the glass or throughout the bottle, right?
Yes, and that's like drinking a bottle of wine is a whole experience.
Mm-hmm.
So
sure is. Sure is. Well, Grayson, this twist, right, that we are about to get into, I hope you have I hope you bought 2 bottles of that thing, because you're probably going to need it after what I'm about to tell you about. So again, just to refresh everybody's minds, we just left off and we just found out that Mary's car has seemingly disappeared. And so let's find out what happened to Mary's car.
So I feel like if this continues to twist as much, I'll just start drinking out of the bottle, and then we'll just leave the glass to be to the side.
Yeah, so we're gonna need to do that. So, sometime after August 1984, when Mary was reported missing, and when police asked Dominic about the broken window in Mary's car, the car just simply disappears without explanation. I never saw what Dominic said happened to the car, but there was no sign, according to police, of it ever being sold. No paper trail at all.
So my question is, they looked at it, they saw the window was broken out, and they didn't take anything. They didn't see any foul play, and now it's gone. So I would say the smashed window was pretty damning evidence, but then now it's gone. So that's even worse for me. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh no, for sure. Right. And it seems like, and to be fair, right, like it's a year later, right? Like a year later plus, when you finally decide to revisit this car, right? Like that's a long freaking time. And so the fact that it had that there was no paper trail of being sold is super suspicious. But frankly, I'm not necessarily surprised that Dominic didn't have it anymore. But definitely mad suspicious that it just seemed to be poof gone into thin air. There was, as though it never even existed.
And so Dominic just said he didn't know, or did they hear from him? Did he have any explanation?
I don't know. I never saw that necessarily. I never saw, I don't even know if they really, I'm sure they asked him, they had to have asked him, but I simply didn't see what his excuse was. I mean, maybe he said, yeah, I sold it, and that's when they looked for evidence of it being sold and never saw it. I mean, that would make sense to me, right? Like, I mean, I feel like that would be a logical, like, playoff of, like, hey, like, I don't have the car because, like, it wasn't mine, I got rid of it, like, we're no longer married, it's gone, like, the car is gone, like,
right.
Who cares, But, like, also not who cares, because I can't even imagine what's in the car. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yes.
I want to know what kind of evidence is in that car.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah. Well, at this point, Mary's daughters are convinced of some kind of foul play involved in their mother's disappearance. They tell WTNH, the ABC affiliate in Hartford, Connecticut, that they are more and more sure that there are people close to the family who know what happened and are protecting the people who hurt their mother. And in 1986, investigators end up getting a pretty wild tip from a jail informant, of all people, about Dominic's possible ties to a local gang. The informant tells investigators that one of Dominic's sons is a member of the Hells Angels, an international motorcycle gang. We talked about them on the Willie Picton episode 32 of this podcast. Well, the informant says that Mary had been killed by Dominic's son and one of his friends after the Hells Angels issued a contract on her life at the request of Dominic. The informant says that they followed through on this because Mary was going to go to police with really incriminating information about Dominic, so they wanted to get to her first.
So sometimes when you're seeing true crime, you see with these informants that oftentimes they're just trying to maybe get a lighter sentence, get some benefit. Yep. But I don't know. This seems like it could have some basis behind it. But, I mean, who knows at this point? But
yeah,
it could go both ways. So when I hear the informant thing, I don't know. I take it with a grain of salt sometimes until I get some harder evidence, I feel like.
Yeah, listen, like a jail informant is like the lowest list on my witness list in terms of reliable witnesses.
Yes.
So yeah, that I'm 100% hearing you there too. It does seem like really left field for me, right? Because it's like you're living this like suburban lifestyle. You have a couple of kids, like you have like a couple stepkids, you have a wife, like all this stuff.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're a member of a gang. Like, I don't really understand how where that came from. If you look at pictures of him, like, sure, I guess I could see him in a motorcycle gang, but like, it just didn't really vibe for me to be like, this is the reason. And like, what's that incriminating information?
Right. That's true.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I don't know. It just seemed really left field for me. And like, as far as I know, Dominic doesn't have like a criminal history. He has like a history of like female battery, but like he doesn't have necessarily like a history of like deep, dark crime. Yeah. And like Mary to me just seemed like a very normal like suburban wife, and so it just doesn't really jive for me that like she would be able to like get the information that would take him down if he was really involved in all that.
Yeah, but also you see, I mean, I get the whole point of her maybe not figuring it out, but then you see these crazy cases with serial killers and big criminals, and they live a totally normal life, and then all of a sudden they have this
that's fair
double life that they know their people that are closest to him know nothing about. So you never know. It's crazy.
Yeah, well, and who's to say like Mary didn't like stumble across something in his drawer that she wasn't supposed to.
Right.
So that's a good point. Again, I always say, we've talked about it before in this podcast, I'll say it again, you don't know anybody 100%, even the person you're sleeping next to at night. Like, you don't know what they like everyone has something that they keep to themselves, you know what I mean?
Right.
And like some of those things are darker than others.
Absolutely.
So who knows? Well, as far as I can tell, police take the tip seriously enough, but they don't have anything to back that up necessarily. And when they interview Dominic's son about this, who apparently has a long criminal history of arson, for reasons I can't really fully explain, he refuses to cooperate, and that friend refused to be interviewed by police at all, but he does agree to take a polygraph test, but apparently he fails that. But I never really saw any like follow-up there, so I don't really have any answers for you, Grayson. I'm sorry. That friend is later killed in a motorcycle accident, though, but again, investigators don't really seem to be fully convinced that they were going to learn much from him anyways, and seem even less convinced that they had anything to do with Mary's disappearance, at least directly.
Well, number one crime junkie rule is never do a polygraph test.
Right.
So I see those two, and I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and like I see, like the whole point of the polygraph, right, is to like try to like get more information from someone, maybe get a search warrant, like create a suspect list. I didn't really see that come from this failed polygraph test, so I don't really know what the point was, to be perfectly honest. It feels odd to me.
And then it's kind of humorous when he's killed and the investigators are like, well, doesn't seem like we were going to get much from him anyway. So yeah, it seems like so far like this informant is, like, as you're talking about it, going along with this investigation is probably doesn't have much backing to it. I don't know.
Yeah, and like spoiler alert, like that's pretty much the last of this theory. Like that's where this theory pretty much dies for, that's probably not the best word, but like that like it dies with this guy. So like that's pretty much like where we're at. Like that's it.
Yeah.
So again, spoiler alert, that's not the theory that we're going with here at all, but it's still just interesting wilds, like again, left field kind of stuff. Like anytime the Hell's Angels are involved, I'm like, okay, let's talk about this for sure.
Yes.
In 1990, Mary's case is officially declared a homicide, with some help from the family's local state representative, who lobbied hard for the case to be reevaluated and apparently had even received some threats for doing so, and even said that she had a brick thrown through her window, too.
So what changed?
I'm glad you talked about this, because I have actually a lot to say about the state representative.
Yeah.
But the state representative, like just lobbied the state, like saw that there was an injustice here, that they were investigating it as a missing persons case, not a homicide case, and so she just pushed really, really hard for state police on behalf of the family to flip it over to a homicide investigation, to turn it over to the murder investigators, as opposed to just like the missing people investigators, because those are two similar but very different things at the same time.
Right.
Yeah. But also, so again, I'm glad you said that, because the state representative with the brick thing, kind of, I know we talked about, we said we weren't going there, but like the whole like Hell's Angels gang thing, like that seems like organized crime to me, right? Like if someone is like pushing so hard to like, stick their nose into this homicide and, homicide and missing persons investigation, and then all of a sudden you're getting threats from it, like if Dominic really does have those ties to the Hells Angels, like maybe those are the people who did this kind of thing, right? Like it wouldn't just be Dominic, presumably, who did this. I mean, his son doesn't really seem like the most stand-up dude, so like maybe he had something to do with it. But like point being is the like those kind of like if somebody who's like so like far removed from the case but like got themselves involved is now suddenly in the line of danger, like that seems like some bad people may be actually tied up here that we don't know about.
Yeah, it kind of puts some backing behind. I mean, the somebody's out to get her, or somebody was out to get her, and that's why she disappeared type of deal.
Exactly. Yeah, a little bit. And like we're gonna shut up whoever is trying to shed light on that. Right. But for years and more than a decade after that involvement, the case ran cold. Mary's daughters had grown up, so did Beth's child, without their grandmother to sing them to sleep or to make them lunch. Sherry had gotten married too, without her mother there to see it all happen. And they were both convinced that Dominic had something to do with Mary's disappearance, Mary's murder. But, with nothing to prove that Dominic had anything to do with this case, investigators couldn't do anything about it, and Dominic walked free for years. By the early 2000s, the whole family had come to terms with their new reality, although it didn't stop the dreams of their mother miraculously coming home one day, safe and sound, or the hope that justice would one day be done. And those hopes were reignited when police get another tip, this time about a new character to our story. His name is Ernest Dockenhausen, and the tip said that Ernest was responsible for helping Dominic hide Mary's car.
That I mean, being a mother myself, just thinking about her kids and what they're going through with all of this really is, I mean, I can feel just their determination, and they don't have the answers, and their mom just got up and walked away, and then now this tip has come in and didn't really happen with it, so now we have something else. So maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it'll lead this somewhere. So does it go anywhere?
Well, kind of. The tipster says that Ernest buried Mary's car on one of his properties, Grayson. And so investigators question Ernest about this. And he says that he does know Dominic, actually, but had nothing to do with Mary's disappearance. And interestingly, he's fairly cooperative about the whole thing, and he tells police where to find multiple cars that were buried on properties that he used to own.
So I'm not anywhere specializing in burying cars, but I don't think that that's like a easy Sunday afternoon event to bury a car. Like, it seems like that has a lot of effort in there.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm imagining you can't just do that with a shovel, right? Like, you are probably buying equipment and doing this whole thing, but also, again, like, why are you burying one car, let alone multiple cars, right? Like, we have so many questions about this, right? Like, all of my alarm bells are going off.
So I may be jumping ahead, but do they look for these multiple cars?
Yeah, they do, actually, Grayson. Police end up spending $35,000 to dig up both of the former properties Ernest used to own. And they find a few cars on one of his properties, but not Mary's. And police end up arresting and charging Ernest with interfering with a police investigation for allegedly giving false and misleading information to police about where they could find the cars that he says were on his property.
Okay, so one, it's really just blowing my mind that somebody is just burying cars on their property. But then now it seems like this tip has some basis behind it. They did find something, but now that it wasn't what they wanted, they're maybe not too happy about it. I don't know. Charging Ernest is a little wild to me.
It is a little wild, and I have something to say about that for sure. But like the fact that because what I'm imagining here, right, is like why, and I don't really fully know how this whole trial played out. But what I'm imagining here, right, is that he probably told investigators, you can find Mary's car on my property next to this tree or whatever the heck it was, and it wasn't there, right? And so like it was like they were having to he was probably messing with them a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So oh yeah, well maybe it's next to that tree, like that kind of thing. And so like finally they just like dug up the whole thing, found a few cars, not Mary's, right? And so time wasted, and so therefore you're going down for something, right?
And also $35,000, that's not pocket change. That's a lot of money to spend on that. So I get they, maybe a little bit upset about dropping that kind of cash.
Yeah, I agree. And also too, so like the fact that they charge him at all, right? Like, cause I've seen this so many times, it's like textbook at this point, right? Where it's like, this is like, we're 25 years or 20, sorry, I'm doing math, not good at math, everyone knows. 20 years after, after Mary disappeared, right? There is not a single person who's gone to trial, not a single person who's faced charges directly related to Mary's disappearance. And so now they're probably just at the point where it's like, okay, well, let's get somebody in to a courtroom so that way we can start laying out some things, right? Like having an arrest, having someone to charge, opens up so many different investigative avenues for you to be able to find more things to look for, right? Open up that Pandora's box, hopefully anyways, of Mary's disappearance, right? So like we're going after a small fish here, but like to hopefully eventually go after the much bigger fish of this whole entire situation.
Right.
That's at least my theory here.
And we do see this a lot whenever they get people for little charges, and hopefully that they'll figure out something else. So it's kind of like a domino effect. So that seems to be a common play that I've seen with true crime cases.
Yeah, not a bad strategy at all. But 25 years after Mary's disappearance, this was the first time that anything, again, even kind of related to Mary's case, was in an open courtroom, allowing police and prosecutors to finally get some things on the record about Mary's case, and they take their opportunity to point a finger directly at Dominic. Grayson, can you read a quote from an investigator's testimony in Ernest's trial?
Absolutely. It says, my main suspect at the time is Dominic Badaracco Sr., who is the last person to see the victim alive and had a history of extramarital affairs and domestic violence, and who gave inconsistent information to police. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, bonkers, right? Because Dominic, obviously not facing charges here. And it's like, and like, this, Grayson, because you've covered a lot of crime stories as I have, right? Like, you have to pull teeth to get investigators most of the time to name a suspect before an arrest has been made. And so the fact that he has been just floating through for 20 years and you have a lot riding here, and you're just going to openly say in open court that Dominic's my guy, when in reality, if you really think about this whole thing, Dominic isn't really tied to this trial directly in any way, shape, or form, right? It's all Ernest, and it's all about the cars. It is really, honestly, I mean, if Dominic didn't have anything to do with this, right?
Yeah. Right.
Didn't have anything, this has nothing to do with Dominic in any way, shape, or form. So the fact that they just yeah, sure.
Right.
It's crazy to me. That never happens. So point being is this is either a real interesting strategy, or they must be this freaking close to being able to charge him.
Yeah, and that's curious for me, because I've been working with law enforcement since 2018, and so years of talking with them in major crime murder cases, and I can tell you they'll look at me sometimes and say, "Hey, I can't tell you this right now.
Yeah,
this will hurt the investigation."
Right.
And so I don't even know what would be a strategy of doing this. What would be the benefit of that? I don't even know.
Well, I don't, if there even is a strategy, maybe they're just saying it, right? Cause I thought back to, the Sherry Orofino case, right? Cause in that case, they said, real freaking, plainly, over and over and over again, to the newspaper, that Ronald was their guy. They just didn't have anything to prove it. This is kind of the same thing. But it's just kind of I don't know. I don't know. I don't get what the thing is unless, I mean, they're just gonna let the cat out of the bag, because maybe this is a way to put some pressure on people, but also that's kind of illegal, so I don't really know, I don't know what to, they could get sued for this. I don't know, it's just a weird thing. So that's why I think they must be pretty darn sure, because to be able to risk a potential libel lawsuit,
right,
in my opinion,
they've got they seem to have something.
Yeah. For sure. They've got some cojones is what they've got, frankly.
Yeah, and I need more wine before we continue on. So let me let me take care of that. All right, go for it.
Cool. Resume. Well, Ernest ended up being acquitted on his charges in May of 2009. But again, this reignited Mary's case when it seemed like nothing else really, was really working to shake something loose here. So in 2010, prosecutors bring together a grand jury to investigate Mary's disappearance, and they meet well into 2011, hearing testimony from 62 witnesses in all, including Mary's daughters, Beth and Sherry. And while grand jury proceedings are done in private, Dominic gets wind that Beth and Sherry are called to testify. And when he hears this, he decides to call in a favor. And boy, oh boy, Grayson, this phone call is real interesting. Crime Over Wine is proud to support Emancipet. Veterinary care shouldn't be a mystery, and neither should your pet's health. Emancipet's licensed veterinarians have answers to all of your pet questions. In the Vet Ed video series, veterinarians break down topics from spaying and neutering to protecting your pet in cold weather. Learn more at emancipet.org and watch Vet Ed on the Emancipet YouTube channel. Dominic ends up calling a friend of his who happens to be a judge, right? Like, good friend to have, I guess.
Right.
The judge used to serve as Dominic's lawyer, but now they're just strictly golf buddies, just friends. Dominic asks the judge if he knows anything about this grand jury that's been impaneled about Mary. And again, judges have nothing to do officially with grand jury proceedings, but like legal folks talk, right? And the judge says that he knows nothing about this grand jury, but after a bit of pleading on Dominic's part, the judge says, okay, let me see what I can do.
So he's pulling in a favor.
He's pulling in a favor, yeah. He's calling a bud, hey, I need some legal help. Can you have the end, can you kind of poke around and see what you can kind of find out at the about this whole thing. But again, so let's talk about grand juries here, right? Because like we talked about it previously, but like let's put like additional emphasis here because it's like super relevant here. Right. Grand juries done in private. I don't even think of the judge. Like there shouldn't even be a judge in the room, as far as I'm aware. Again, never been in a grand jury hearing because it's so private that way, but it's usually like a group of, it's like a jury of your peers, still a grand jury of your peers, that they're long-term commitments. But it's just the prosecutors presenting their case to see if the grand jury is okay with this. Like all bets are off, frankly. Like there's nothing that's off the table, frankly, as far as grand jury hearings go. You present enough to see if there's enough there to charge someone with a case, so that way they can go ahead and face a trial. But like judges, again, like a judge does not make a ruling here in any way, shape, or form. And so I don't know for sure, but I feel pretty confident saying that judges aren't even in the room for this whole thing. Wow. And so this was just strictly just, like, what are you hearing? What's the scuttlebug kind of thing? And Dominic is making this phone call. And so that's where we're at.
Wow. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, so the judge apparently has lunch with some judge friends of his, and he asks about the grand jury, learns that it does indeed exist, and calls Dominic back to confirm that there is, again, indeed a grand jury, and that Dominic was at the center of its investigation. But that was all that he knew. That's all he could find out for him. But Dominic, at this point, is desperate, right? So he pleads with the judge for his help. But when the judge insists that there was nothing he could do about it and that Dominic was just going to have to wait and see how it all played out, Dominic eventually says, quote, "I'm only going to say this one time. It's worth 100 G's."
Wow. So my thing is he so invested in this because he did something he shouldn't have, or is he just like, oh no, I'm scared because I'm named as a main suspect here? Like, I don't know. Like, it could go either way, I feel like.
It really could go either way, right? But, like, the fact that he's the center of the investigation, right, is, like, super damning. The fact that he is making these phone calls and, like, bribing a judge, right? Like, that's a straight-up bribe. Find this out for me, I'll give you $100,000, which, oh, by the way, happens to be the same amount of money that you said that Mary ran off with. Let's not forget that, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, maybe she didn't run off with it then. If he just has that laying around again, we have a lot of $100,000 in cash just chilling in the pocket.
Yeah, I don't know a whole lot of people who have $100,000 at the ready 2 times in their life.
But also, yeah, like and 62 witnesses. I mean,
that's a lot. Yeah,
that's a lot. I just covered probably one of the highest profile cases in our county here in Chattanooga, and I think we ended up having like 16, and that seemed like a lot to me. I mean, yeah, at this time, what do you have? A broken window, a car not here now, and no body, I mean, what do you? I mean, they're not going off that much.
No, they sure aren't. And like, again, I have to we say this all the time, like, the investigators know so much more than we do, right? I mean, like, period. And so I'm sure there are a lot of other things to do here, but like so you have to, I would imagine 90% of those witnesses are painting the picture of the kind of person that Dominic was, and his history of violence, his history of affairs. So that way you can kind of, let them know who they're dealing with, at the end of the day.
Right. And if you were going to do, I mean, if it did go to a jury trial when he was there, they would totally play off of that because, I mean, juries are people. Yeah. They feel emotions. And so the more you can play on their emotions, the better it is for your side of, being either guilty or not guilty. So
Yeah, no, 100,000%. Yeah, you're definitely right about that. The judge, replied though, in this conversation, saying, which by the way, I have to say was transcribed in in a warrant, and so like this leads me to believe that the conversation was probably recorded. So let's keep that in mind. But the judge says that he would do what he could do, but instead of helping Dominic, he instead goes straight to police to report him for attempting to bribe a judge. And police, who had been frustrated for decades that they had nothing significant to nail Dominic once and for all, lunged on this opportunity to put him behind bars.
And see, this is what we're talking about. This is what we're talking about with the little trinkets where you can get somebody into the jail and talk to them. It's throwing those breadcrumbs of like, hey, we got you for something, so let's try to get this to do something bigger.
100%. And at that point, you don't need a warrant to get their DNA. You don't need a warrant. Like, it's much easier to get a warrant to search their house, to search their car, to search their phone, all that stuff. So yeah, you're 100% true there. And it's about to get you're about to get even more evidence of that too, Grayson. So again, hold that thought 100,000%. Dominic is arrested and charged with attempted bribery. And this is yet another opportunity for prosecutors to get something on the record and to dig a bit more into Mary's disappearance and to hopefully get him on something there too. The judge ends up allowing the prosecutors to present some evidence in Dominic's trial about Mary, saying that there needed to be some context for this phone call, but it was to be very, very limited, making it clear that Dominic was not on trial for murder. Dominic's lawyer tells WTNH that Dominic had nothing to do with Mary's disappearance and excuses the phone call as a simple misunderstanding. That Dominic was deaf in one ear and that his arrest warrant even points out the difficulty in understanding the context of the phone call because of that.
Interesting. Well, I mean, just let's give some kudos to the judge, though. It seems like this is his friend. It's somebody that he's known, and he still does the right thing here, which is, a little bit, sometimes we lose some faith in the judicial system, and here it's like, okay, doing a little bit better. I like that a little bit, but
yeah. And also to be clear too, like the judge that we're talking about who's presiding over the trial is a different judge than the one that Dominic was attempting to bribe, because conflict of interest 101 there.
This is different.
But still, and both those situations though, I totally agree with you that like it's that sometimes you don't really know if who may or may not be corrupt, and like certainly someone who makes a living in any way, shape, or form, right, would be really hard to turn down $100,000, and instead of just taking it and trying to do the sleuthing, he went straight to police. So good for him.
Well, yeah, it's pretty cold in Chattanooga right now. I would love to, have a random $100,000 and go to a beach. Warm up a little bit.
Yeah, agreed. But the whole like deaf in one ear thing, I'm calling bullshit, right? Like in my opinion, right? Because like the like you straight up said that you're going to like give someone quote 100 G's, like this is what this is worth, and like you're like I don't know what the full extent of this potential misunderstanding was all about, but I am simply like, I'm not buying that. It's just a weird excuse. It's like, like just because you're deaf in one ear does not mean that you don't understand what is a bribe and what is not a bribe.
Right. And I feel like if you have a phone call and you're deaf in one ear, well, then you're just going to put the phone to the other ear.
In the ear you can hear from. Right.
Right. And I don't know. Yeah, that's, I don't know. Putting excuses out there. I don't think we should throw it out.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, they have to do, the lawyer has to do what they can. Sure, whatever, cool.
All right.
But, the jury doesn't buy it. Dominic is convicted in June of 2013 and is sentenced to 7 years in prison. But he was released in April of 2016 on parole for good behavior. Mary's daughters later told the News-Times that they were satisfied to see him spend just a little time where they believe he belonged, but were frustrated because, that was only a short time and that it wasn't for charges related directly to their mother's disappearance.
Right. I mean, they jump-started that investigation. They got some justice. They got him behind bars, but yet still it didn't lead to them getting any closer to solving the disappearance of their mom. So, and also, what, he serves 3 years and then he's out on good behavior.
And now, like, just to be clear, like, today he's like good, like he's a free man, you know,
just hanging out,
right?
Yeah,
I don't know. And like, again, I simply don't know, right? Like, for sure or not for sure, that Dominic did or did not do this, right? But like, so like, like, keep all that in mind and all this too. But like, point being of this is that like justice wasn't served on whoever had something to do with it, right? So, again, neither Dominic nor anyone else, frankly, has been charged with Mary's disappearance or her death. And even today, police are publicly calling Dominic their number one suspect. Mary's body has still not been found. Neither has her Chevy Cavalier, which surely holds some piece of evidence that would lead us directly to Mary. Today, Mary's name and face is distributed in a pack of playing cards across Connecticut state prisons in an effort to raise awareness about her case, maybe to bring forth some new information that would bring her home for good. So, if you know anything about Mary Badaracco's disappearance, call Connecticut State Police at 1-800-376-1554. We're going to put the number on our website and in our show notes. There is a $50,000 reward for information that leads to an arrest. But for now, Grayson, that is all that we have for you. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yes, gosh, her poor family. I just,
Right.
That gets it. Yeah.
And super unsatisfying ending, right? I just have to say, like, we ended very abruptly, it felt like, anyways, but like that's what we have. And like, I'm gonna get into my soapbox here a little bit too, because like I get it all the time. I get the Facebook messages, I get the Instagram notifications about like how they hate when the case is unsolved, how there's no resolution here. But these cases are so important, right? Because especially like I have a lot of listeners in this area, and so like there's a very high chance that like this episode reaches somebody who may know something, right? Who may, or at the very least, know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who may know something. And so it's so important to keep in mind, right, that we're not just like, like doing this to make you feel something, and like, to hold on to some suspense and like be able to go to sleep afterwards because that person was behind bars. Like, you should also be able to listen to these cases and feel a little bit of action from this, and like know that like by listening to this episode, you are helping to spread the word about Mary Badaracco, because we need to reach the right people here. We need to put the right pressure on people. I do feel like there is like one thing I strongly believe that is gonna like push the needle over to like finally solving Mary's case and like to put someone behind bars for this for sure. I don't know what it is, but like it really just feels like that, right? It feels like there's like an itch that we're not able to scratch here.
Right. And I just think about that car. Like if from the start, and I feel like that's always like hindsight's 20/20.
Right.
And you have investigators who they do this every day, and they can't tell when, oh man, this one thing I would have looked at could have been the thing that solved the case years ago. And so it's so tough because you have these incredible people who really care and they're doing this job. Yeah. And gosh, I'm sure
people, right? Like they're human beings. Yeah.
And I'm sure that the investigators on this case, especially ones who have know about this, are like, man, beating themselves up of, man, if we could have just gotten that car, maybe we could have solved this. Right. I know. Yep. Gosh, it's so tough. It's so tough.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I just kind of like flop back and forth in my mind about like what could have like actually happened. So I do want to know, like, where does your mind land here, Grayson?
I'm always, the first person you need to look at is whoever is that person's significant other. So I don't care what it is, what the evidence is. If I look into an investigation, it's always going to be the person that they're with. And when you see that domestic violence behind it, and also the separation, domestic violence is oftentimes built on control. And so if Dominic was losing control, his anger could have gotten out of hand. And maybe even if he did, I'm not going to be here and convict him here, but if he is the person who is responsible for her murder, if, his emotions got a little bit too hot and heavy, and maybe it was an accident, or maybe something. When you have somebody who has a past of being abusive, it's all on emotion and anger. So I can't rule him out. I can't rule him out.
He's not ruled out in my book in any way, shape, or form, for sure. And I do think that if he didn't have something to do directly with it, I feel very confident saying that he knows something. Yeah. Because somebody got rid of that car, right? And so I need to know where the car is. I feel pretty confident saying it's buried somewhere. I don't know where the heck it is, but I need to know that.
Yes.
And man, I also just have to say that wherever the car is, I feel like Mary's not too far away from that, I don't know. It just feels like if we find the car, we find Mary.
Yeah.
That's really strongly how I feel about that.
Well, I feel like people need to look and be like, oh, did you buy this car this year? Because he may have just gotten rid of it. And maybe this reaches the right person who is like, oh no, I bought this car for a really good deal.
Oof, a little too good of a deal, right?
Yeah. If you bought a car for a couple $100 and you thought this is a deal in the Connecticut area, check it.
Yeah.
Give it to police. May solve the case.
Don't know. I would think so. I don't know. Because what are the odds, right, that there's some dude who's in this town who's known for burying cars, and there's a woman whose car disappeared, and he knows and that dude knows Dominic, and yet a car wasn't buried in the process. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I think that sums it up fairly well.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But again, I have to say it again. I'm just going to put the number out there one more time. If you know anything, the Connecticut State Police, that's the number you want to call. It's 1-800-376-1554. The number's on our website and in our show notes. And that's it. And that's the end of the case. Again, I feel like I have that one extra thing, but I don't. So that's where we're at, Grayson. So I just have to say, that's all we got. So tell everyone where they can find you and your work online if you would want to.
If you want to find me on social, I am mainly on Twitter. That's my main type of deal. And it's Grayson on Air. My name is spelled pretty weird, Gracyn. So my mom wanted to be spicy and throw in a Y into my name. Go. So
love that. Well, we're gonna tag Grayson on social media and all that jazz. So if you want to go find her, go scroll back through her social media pages and go follow her there. So you don't have to worry about spelling her name right.
Write it down right now.
Right, write it down. Well, thank you again so much for coming on, Grayson, and thank you all so much for listening. We are going to put all of our sources on our website so you can read everything for yourself and probably come up with a few theories too. And if you are just loving this podcast and are just looking for a way to tell everyone and anyone about it, the best way to help people discover this podcast is by leaving us a 5-star rating and a review wherever you are listening right now. So make sure you follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you're wondering what we have in store for you next week, here's a quick sneak peek. Hello, everybody. It's Liam.
And it's me, Blaze Keller. Next week, I am re-entering the crime vineyard, and we have a crazy story for you. Hundreds of bodies found in one of the most unlikely places. We'll tell you what happens at the Tri-State Crematorium.
Y'all will not believe this story is real, but boy, oh boy, it is. And you'll have to wait until next Wine Wednesday to hear all about it on the next episode of Crime Over Wine.
Proud member of the Podnuga Network.